Hey y'all, Austin here with Outer World Media. Welcome back to another book review, guys. This is one, to be honest with you guys, I'm not sure how long this review is going to be. This is a book that I had like a 6 or 7 or 8 month hiatus in between, or break, if you will, in between half of the book, reading the first half of the book and the second half. But you know what? I'm going to give it my best shot, so let's get into it. I am talking about book 2 of Malazan, Book of the Fallen, specifically Deadhouse Gates. This is one, clocks in around 834 pages, reading material wise. This is a book. If you've read, and again, I'm going to try to make this spoiler free or as best I can. So in the first book, we're introduced to this set of cast, this first cast. And then in this book, we're introduced into a new cast, but with some characters from before. What I will say, my favorite character from the first book is not in this one. And I'm not going to say who that is, again, because I don't want to spoil anything. But, like the first book, this is one, we're introduced to the cast slowly over time, and then we bounce back and forth between the cast of characters. Now, that being said, this first opening prologue or whatever kind of sets the pace for the story. Again, without trying to spoil anything, we're introduced to this imagery of what these characters are dealing with and just the brutality of this world and what war will do to people and, how it affects everybody else, no matter what your ranking in society is, whether you're, for example, like a king or queen or millionaire, or you're just a lowly peasant, or you're somewhere in between like a shop owner or a bookkeeper or something like that. Everybody is affected. And Mr. Erickson does a great job opening this story because we really are introduced to a few different characters who have different tiers in society and life. And we're again shown it doesn't matter when it comes to war and all this other stuff. Like everybody's affected somehow, some way. So he sets the pace there. And from there, this book really takes off. And I'm not gonna lie, like I said, I did put this book down for about 6 or 7, maybe even 8 months. I forget what it was. And it wasn't because I wasn't enjoying the book. It's because in a book like this, you really have to be in the right mindset. You really are enjoying it or you're not. And, kind of starting off right off the bat, I will say if you're someone who's wanting to read this series, as someone who is only 2 books in, if you're not feeling it, I would, recommend most books. I think you could there's going to be some slumps where you can kind of push through and then things will pick back up. And that may be the case for some people with this book. What I will say for this series, at least for this book, if you're not feeling it, put it down, come back and try it again. Because, I think if I would have pushed myself to keep reading this, I don't think I would have enjoyed it or retained as much. That being said, like I said, you bounce around in this book like you do in the first one. And the cast of characters in this book are very, very entertaining, very interesting. Again, I have finished the book and I still have questions, and I finished the book. And I know as the series goes on, certain questions get answered, some not. And I know there's a lot of people that say, hey, you should go back and reread the series. You'll understand a little bit better. And I know in my reread of Gardens of the Moon, I understood stuff a lot better and picked up on certain things. So I think this is definitely a book that I will have to go back and reread. But again, these characters that we're introduced to, they go through some crazy stuff, to say the least. It's kind of hard to do a review about this without going into spoilers, and I don't want to spoil this for anybody. I want to make this video for people that have finished the first book and they're kind of on the fence, like, I enjoyed it, but do I really need to continue? What I will say, I enjoyed this one after finishing it as much as I did the first book, my first read through. Now, these characters, and that's something I'm kind of learning about myself. I've never fully been a character-driven reader. I kind of want a good balance of story and characters. With this, because of, and I've seen a video where people, a few different videos where people were talking about how it's not that confusing. You can follow things pretty well. This, and I think it just depends from person to person, and kind of if you're in the mood to read it. If you're not, then that there's a lot of factors that come into play. Now, what I will say is this book was very, very character driven. That's what this series so far has been for me. While there's been great action and battles and whatnot, you really have to like the characters. And Mr. Erickson kind of sets each character and makes them their own. Again, I had quite a few, at the minimum of a 6 month difference between, hiatus in the first half of the book and the second half. And I thought I remembered everything, and I did for the most part, but character names didn't sound too familiar. I was like, okay, what character is this? But as their dialogue went on, I was like, okay, this is this character. I know what's going on with this, and that's a praise that I really want to give Mr. Erickson is he gives each character their own voice. This was one. Not as much God meddling in this. If I'm, and I don't think that's a spoiler. From what I remember, I don't think there's as much meddling by the gods in this. So this is quite a bit of character driven work. We're just following these characters along, just trying to see what's the end goal here. Again, there's some parts of this book that I'm got some questions about still, and I know I'm kind of just bouncing around in this review and definitely not going to probably be my best review out there. But again, I want to make these spoiler free. But again, Deadhouse Gates, I don't think it was my favorite so far. I think Gardens of the Moon definitely was better than this. But again, this is one, and there's some scenes in here that'll break you. And what I mean by that is, you'll be reading for this character, and then something will happen, and you're like, holy crap, like what? How did that happen? I was actually on vacation, and I was mostly reading this book on my Kindle while on the plane and sitting in the airport and all this stuff going around me, and I was just glued in. There was no way I was putting that book down. I read 400, almost 500 pages, give or take. I think it's about 300 to 400 pages if I had to guess. Math is hard, guys. Just on my flights alone, and by the time I came back home, I told my wife, I said, I gotta finish this book. I can't do anything else until I finish this book. And I sat there for an hour just finishing this book. And that's something I will say. While the first 3 quarters of this book, you're kind of like, okay, what's going on here? By the last quarter of the book, you're glued in. You are in the zone, at least for me, and you want to see what happened to these characters. And there are some brutal things that happen throughout this book. But that last quarter of this book, yeah, it definitely had me glued in and made me feel something for these characters because you spend 800 something pages reading about these characters and you're like, no, don't let this happen. Don't, no. And the good thing to that is, Mr. Erickson puts something in, something 100 pages before in this book, and you get swept up and caught up in all this other stuff that's happened that you forget about this. And, that happened in Gardens of the Moon as well. But again, Deadhouse Gates, while I did enjoy it, again, I did take a little bit of a break and a hiatus, but I will say, having picked this book back up, that's no problem. I really, really enjoyed this book. The more I started getting into it and getting, I think that really helped. If you're in the right frame of mind, what I mean by that is if you're in the mood to read this, you will fly through this book. It don't matter if it's 800 pages or 1,000 pages, I think. I think you will fly through this book. If you're in the mood and you're clicking with those characters and connected with them, which I was, you are going to really enjoy Deadhouse Gates. Again, he steps the brutality up in this. Let's just say no characters are kept safe. We'll just leave that. Between the first 2 books, I can say no character is off the book to have something happen to them. But again, guys, that is kind of my impromptu, kind of bouncing all over the place review for Deadhouse Gates by Steven Erickson. Great book. Cannot wait to continue on with this series and see what happens. I know book 3, from what I understand, we were introduced to a new cast of characters, so we'll see. But again, guys, as always, I hope you guys have a good one.